Hi everyone, I'm Josie from the Rideau Lakes Horticultural Society. I'm just going to wait till everybody joins. I see that some are still in process of joining, so we'll just wait another minute here. All right, so we are going to get started. Tonight we have Dale Odorizzi. She is a Master Gardener with Lanark County Master Gardeners. Master Gardeners is a volunteer organization comprised of individuals who are certified horticultural experts who provide gardening information and advice to the gardening public. She has been gardening all her adult life, first in a smaller city garden, then a large country garden, and now in a condominium garden where she maintains the condo gardens and gardens on a balcony. Her gardens have all been designed to attract birds, butterflies, bees, turtles, frogs, and toads. When asked why she became a master gardener, Dale replied, "I had just retired and moved to Lanark County. I wanted to do volunteer work, and when I learned I could combine a desire to do that work in an area I loved, I applied to the Lanark County Master Gardeners. I liked the fact that there was an educational program starting with courses from the University of Guelph, as well as ongoing continuous education. I've been fortunate to work with some of the best gardeners in Lanark County and across Ontario. Try it, you might love it as I do." Today's presentation focuses on keeping your garden looking great by understanding your garden and selecting plants that will grow easily in that space. She will also discuss the newer approaches to putting your garden to bed for the winter. So we will get started and I will share my screen and then Dale will get started. All right, here we go.
Well, thank you very much, Josie, and thank you, Rideau Lakes Horticultural Society, for inviting me tonight to talk to you about gardening. I was with you about 7 or 8 years ago and did a presentation on creating a butterfly garden. And so it's nice to be back, and I'll miss the cookies and tea and the chatting afterwards, but thank you again for inviting me. This is a picture of my large rural property in the fall, and most of the pictures that are in here tonight, that's where they come from. Next slide, please. Okay, so we can keep going. Okay, so the best way to keep your garden looking great is to start with happy, healthy plants. And to keep your plants happy, you need to give them what they want. And it is essential then that you know what kind of conditions are in your gardens, and to know what your plant wants. So we'll spend some time getting to know our gardens. And this first picture on the right is a pond we had, and the area where the irises are blooming, that was a very wet area. In the springtime, the pond would be right over top of it, so it would have about a foot of water sitting on top. And so you wouldn't want to put anything in, such as peonies, that like to have a little bit drier type of area. So we tried to look for plants that would love the water. On the other side, on the left-hand side, this was kind of a microcosm, but also a hostile environment. You can see the large juniper here, and it sucked up a lot of moisture from this area, and it faced about west-northwest. So the only sun it got was about 4 hours a day, but it was blinding hot sun. And so you had to be, again, careful about what you would put into that location. Next, please. So the first thing you look at is start with the basics, and it's soil. So it's very important to understand what your soil is all about. So people usually, if they have a clayey soil, they say, "I wish I had sand." If I have a sandy soil, I wish I had clay. So the advantages of sand, it's very easy to work with. If you ever dig a hole in sand, you'll find that it's easy to dig into. It's easy to pull weeds out of. It drains really well, so you don't really run into any overwatering or any problems like with water building up around the roots. But it doesn't hold water very well, and sand is very low on nutrients, so you have to add a lot of nutrients to your soil to get the plants to grow. And ants really love sand, so you'll get a lot of ants within your garden. Now clay, on the other hand, it holds water really well. So anyone who's worked with clay knows that it's very moist. If you grab hold of clay, it feels sticky. It's very poor drainage, but when it does dry out, it gets like cement. So if you walk on it when it's wet, it compacts. There's little oxygen in the soil. So you try to build it up. Now, along comes the hero, and that is organic matter. And organic matter helps to build soil structure. So it supplies nutrients, so it's great to put around sand because it will provide nutrients. It improves water retention in sandy soil, and it helps to loosen up your clay soil. So it's a great thing to have, and putting it on top of by organic matter, I mean compost, leaves, anything that, even sawdust, wood chips, anything that will break down. And if you put it on top of your soil, whether it's sand or clay, it really helps when it rains for the water to go into it. So that's what your soil, so you should really try and understand your soil. Okay, next please. Moisture. How much moisture does your garden get? If it's too high above the water table, the moisture may be inadequate, and you're going to spend all summer long watering it, regularly supplementing it. If it's too close to the water table, the soil may become waterlogged, and you may need to add extra drainage. So choose plants that are best suited to the moisture conditions. If you remember back to one of the early slides down by my pond, you had to pick plants that loved being in water, didn't mind sitting in it, didn't mind getting their roots soaked, and they really loved it. Now, my vegetable garden, which we're not talking about vegetables too much, but it was in a very low area. One year when I was planting potatoes, I dug a hole and it filled up with water, and I thought, oh gosh, my potatoes are all going to rot this year. They were the best ones I ever had. I never had to water my vegetable garden. Moving away from there, it's been much more difficult because I have to be much more disciplined on watering because I don't have this great water table. Okay. I don't know if Josie mentioned about questions, so if you have questions, you could submit them, and we'll answer them at the end.
Yeah, you can choose the chat option at the bottom of your screen. It just looks like a little bubble. Because I'm sharing my screen right now, I don't see it, but we'll go through them at the end, so feel free to fill it up.
Okay. And the zone, now most of you probably know your zone. I expect it's around 5B. Is that what you would say, Josie?
There's discussion between 5B and 5A, but
yeah, but in around that area. So you should really know your plant hardiness zone and choose plants that are suited to it. Now you can always go lower, so you could plant as a zone 3 suitable plant in your garden, but if you go much higher, if you start going, say, well, I really love this zone 6 plant, you might be able to get away with it, but you might have some problems and have to baby them a lot more. One thing I always loved was butterfly bushes, and they were borderline hardy on my property. So it meant that every year I had to pile leaves on it, trying to get it to save, but to me it was worth it because I like them. Now I find out they're supposed to be invasive, even though we can hardly keep them going. So you might have more than one microclimate on your property. So try and look around. I mean, if it's sheltered, you'll have more places to plant things. And a microclimate just means a little climate in your property that might be a zone higher. So you might have a zone 6 if it's up to your house and it gets nice warm sun and that sort of thing. Okay. So as I said earlier, a happy plant is a healthy plant. Now up here I planted I talk with my hands and I'm pointing at the screen. I know none of you can see it. But up in this area, you know, I planted a few plants, like a few liatris, a few gloriosa daisies, and they were very happy. And they expanded, they grew, they thrived because they were planted where they wanted. So if you give the plant what it wants in terms of sun, and I don't believe I have a slide for it, but full sun is usually over 6 hours of sun a day. Part sun is 3 to 6, and shade is seen to be under 3 hours of sun. The soil type and the moisture type. If you give them what they want, they will be happy, they'll grow, they'll thrive, and become great plants. Okay? Now, pretty much everything I grew in my garden on the large property, I grew from seeds. And so I had the first year, a few puny little lupins, and they liked where they were and they grew and they expanded. The same with the butterfly weed. Not quite sure what's back in here, but they all loved where they were. So they were great. Now, and always eye-capturing. I always like to have a big display of something because it captures your eyes, you look at it, and it's hard to turn away. Okay, next please. So when you're selecting your plant, you know what your garden looks like, or you know what you have in your garden. So you've gone through, you've understood your garden. The next thing is to learn what the plants wants. And we won't spend a whole lot of time on going through all the plants and what they want, but you should learn what they want and then give the plant what it wants. Okay, next. So plan in advance. When you're going out, you're trying to learn what a plant wants. It's so tempting to go to the garden center, roam around in the spring, pick all the plants that are in flower, and say, oh, I love this plant. But a lot of times you're missing out on things that will bloom later in the summer or bloom into the fall. So it's a good idea to, if you can read a garden book to understand what plants want, you can check the requirements and check the plant tags at the garden center. So, but really try to learn what they want and plan what they want. Okay, next. So when you're selecting plants, you always have a choice. You'll see the large pots of plants, you know, the 2-gallon pots, that cost about 10 times more than the small pots, but they make immediate impact. So if you're starting in a garden and you want to see immediately what it's going to look like, you can buy a larger pot, and it costs more, but it's easier to tell what the plant's going to look like when it gets bigger. And there's more room for the plant and for its roots. So it could be quite a bit more healthy than just getting the small pots. But I always am cheap, so I usually go and buy the small pots, and that's the best way for me. So they're cheaper, but they often aren't as healthy because, well, if you've ever gone to Canadian Tire in Perth, they don't seem to like to water their plants too often. And so you'll often pick up a plant it's quite dried out, and it's hard for them to keep the plants going. But if it is healthy, it will catch up by year 2. So you can, depending on what you want and where you're going. Okay, next please. And when you're selecting them, look for the healthy bushy plants. You don't want any that's got some dead growth on it unless you're getting a real discount for it. But really look for something that's healthy, something that's bushy. And avoid the ones with the most flowers. So often when we go to buy them, we see a plant with flowers on it and we really want to buy it. You must do plant sales at your Horticultural Society. But we find that in the springtime, any plant that has a flower on it will be sold. But if you've got a nice, healthy daylily, for example, if it doesn't have a flower on, you have to work a lot harder to get people to buy it. So people tend to buy a lot of spring and early summer flowers at our plant sale because they got flowers on them, rather than looking and saying, oh, there's a good, healthy looking plant that's going to bloom in September. No one seems to want that. Look for new growth at the base of the plant as well, because that gives you an indication that it's not just been grown in the greenhouse and, you know, shipped off somewhere, but it's actually growing and it's maturing and it's becoming more wonderful. And then finally, look at the roots. Are they sticking out the bottom of the plant? And that means it's probably becoming pot bound. And pull the plant out of the pot and look at the roots. Just even smell them, because sometimes the plants, the roots are starting to rot because they've been in the pot for too long. So really check it out well. And when you get it home, if the roots are all wrapped around each other, try and break them apart and you know, even cut them a bit. They'll still be good and healthy, but they will grow better, because if you don't cut them, the roots will continue going round and round and round until they will actually kill the plant. Next, please. So when you're planting, make a show. So if you just stick a plant, you know, randomly stick plants in, and you have one of this and one of that and one of another, what you're trying to do is make a show and get them together. So if they're smaller plants, you might want to plant 3 together. The rules are always, you know, plant an odd number of plants. But if you've got one great big plant that will stand on its own, then that's fine. Amend the soil. So this is a great time when you're planting plants to put compost in, any kinds of soil amendments. Prepare a good planting hole and protect at the start. So often when you bring home a new plant, they've been in a greenhouse, they've come out, they keep them in shade at the garden centers, and you're going to put them out into the bright hot sun. And so often people's plants will wilt under this sun. So try to protect them. It might mean putting a pot over top of it for a couple of days. Well, not for a couple of days, not for too long, because they'll die, but try to protect it at the start. And one other thing to remember, especially if you're planting trees, is to think how big the tree or the shrub is going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. I don't know how many of you, this is always a pet peeve with me, but you see someone put a nice little tree right up close to their house. And as the tree starts to grow, it starts to bend away from the house because it doesn't have room to fully grow. And so before too long, the nice form of that little tree, it's become leaning way out to the right or the left, away from the house. And the same if it's planted too close to another tree. So just try to think about, you know, that 2x3 tree is going to be a 20 by 40 foot tree. So be careful with that. Okay. Okay, so once you've got your plants planted and we're going on, we've had some blooming, it's deadheading. Deadheading is so important to keeping your garden looking great. And what do we mean by deadheading? I'm sure you all know, but remove the dead flowers and cut back unsightly foliage. And that really helps to extend the flower life. You might think, oh, well, it's just, you know, who needs to do that? It keeps the garden looking neat and attractive, but the important thing is the flower life, or the plant life, because if you don't take off the dead flowers, they will try and set seed. And setting seed is very hard on a plant. I always think of it as they're giving birth, you know, so they have the little baby plants inside them, and it takes a lot out of you to make these plants. So cutting them off, and it helps to extend the flower life. Okay. So it keeps the plant healthy, extends the life, it keeps the plant from setting seeds, but it's absolutely mandatory with annuals. I can't think of how many times I've had people say, oh, I bought these beautiful marigolds at the store, and they were so beautiful, and now they're not blooming anymore. And typically it's because they haven't had their heads deadheaded. But it keeps the plant neat, it keeps it healthy, and it may even give you a rebloom. So that's a bonus. Okay. And some plants that rebloom, the blanket flower or the Gaillardia, they will bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom as long as you keep deadheading them. And if you leave, you can see a couple of the ones that didn't get deadheaded as yet. But if you leave these on, and you should leave some on at the end of the year, they will set seed, and the next year you have more plants. But this is a nice perennial, nice good little plant. The funny thing about this plant, they're usually supposed to be about 16 or 18 inches tall. Mine were only about 6 inches tall. And I thought, oh, maybe it's a different, variety or something. But my garden where they were planted was very dry. And I gave my mom, because we shared plants all the time, I gave her some. She was a very good waterer. And her plants were 16 to 18 inches tall. So they really, you can tell by the plant, you can see the difference when they're planted right. And this peach leaf campanula, they will bloom forever, but you really have to deadhead them. And I used to deadhead each and every single flower, which is kind of anal retentive, I think, but because just cutting it off will work as well. Okay. The other ones that rebloom are the perennial bachelor buttons and dianthus. And dianthus are a great plant. They bloom so early in the spring, and to deadhead them, it's best just to take your garden shears and shear them right off, because there's so many flowers on the plant, and it really helps. And even if they don't rebloom, they have a nice foliage to them, so they can keep looking good in the garden. Okay. Pinching is another form to help make your plants grow tall. Delphiniums, if you thin them by about a third when they're 6 inches tall, leave 3 to 5 stems, they will grow more healthily. So they'll be a healthier looking plant. This wasn't from my garden. This is a picture I took, but I just love these plants. Remove the lateral flowering spikes. So if any spikes are coming out to the side, get them off, and do not remove the terminal spike, which is ones growing tall. Okay. And there's my dianthus again. Okay, I won't give you the lecture on that again. Next. And Spiderboard is another one that blooms so nicely. It's all the beautiful blue flowers. They come in other colors as well, but I like these. And if you cut them down after they're, because they get kind of messy and they'll flop over, but if you cut them back, they will bloom again and add more beauty. This color blue I always find is hard to get in a flower, and so I like to keep them blooming as long as I could. Okay. So there are many plants that are self-supporting, but there's also many that aren't. So one of the ones I always think about are peonies. They stand up so nice and tall when it's dry, but wind and rain can bring them down. And there's nothing worse than a whole bunch of peonies flop down on the ground. You see these beautiful heads. So you can get ready-made supports like peony rings or grid top, even tomato cages. But the big thing with supporting your plants is to put it in place early in the season so that they'll be there. If you wait until the plant is in full bloom and you start trying to put supports in place, they will you'll usually break them off. So trying to remember to do that. Okay. I never say this word right, but sulpiglossus. This is an annual plant. It's got a tomato cage around it, but the flowers are so top heavy that they would flop over and not survive. But I just love the rich colors of them with the purple and the yellow. I've never seen them for sale at a store. These had to be grown by seed, and that's how it handled it. And they never seem to self-seed or anything like that, but they're a very nice plant. Okay. And the peonies again, here's this peonies, there's lots of good peony cages that you can get, but another simple way is just, you can see the stake at the back and then twine around to hold them up. And you can see me way at the back there, bending over, picking up something. So I guess my husband took this picture for me. Okay. And there's another, these ones never fall over, the Liatris and the Gloriosa daisies, they just never fall over. They could be up there forever. And okay. So dividing perennials, why do we bother doing that? When do we do it? Well, one of the big things is the perennials will grow and grow and grow, and the center becomes weak because just because. So the plants become overcrowded, we get fewer blooms. The flowers and the plants seem smaller than last season. So dividing your perennials really helps you to rejuvenate the plants because you can cut them up, you give them some more space, you can really amend the soil when you're dividing them, and it helps to increase the health of the plant. So, and it also increases the number of plants. So it's a good time when you've got your plant sales. You can donate some. You take one big plant, cut it into 2 or 3, give some away. Okay. So when you're dividing your perennials, it's an ideal time to replenish the soil. And the more compost and organic matter you can add, the better. Peat moss, maybe. I'm not a great fan of peat moss. A lot of people do like it. It will hold the water, but you have to make sure you have it good and moist before you start putting it in. And a handful of bone meal can also be very helpful before replanting. So try and really work it up, work the soil well, get the plants, working good. Okay. And how to divide? Well, on the larger plants, cut back the foliage, carefully loosen the soil around the plants, and water the plant well. So you can get into the plant quite easily. Okay. And when? Well, peonies, September is the time. If you do it early in the year, they usually won't rebloom. So it's a good idea to do your peonies in September. Bearded iris after blooming. And the other thing with peonies, you want their tubers to be very strong. And so you give them all year, where I might cut back foliage on other perennials. I wouldn't cut them back on peonies because you want the leaves to provide nutrition to the plants. So if you're going to do any dividing in the spring, do it early when the plants are 4 to 6 inches tall, and that gives them a lot of time for the roots to establish and may delay blooming. For most plants, it's recommended that you do it after they've flowered. So peonies is the one sort of a difference because they usually flower around the end of June and you don't really do them until September. And in the fall, do it in September, water well. You may use mulch on them. I don't know if anyone has any plants left in the ground that they want to divide. You probably could get away with it still, but you make sure that you protect them, and so put more leaves around them, that sort of thing, if you've been dividing your plants. Okay. Now, the fall garden cleanup. Times have changed, so and it's funny, on some of the Master Gardener Facebook groups, this seems to be the big question this year is, should I be cutting back my perennials? When do I cut them back? But 30 years ago, when we were preparing our gardens for winter, we cut everything back to 6 inches. We applied a thick layer of mushroom compost or compost, trimmed the roses to 2 feet, wrapped them in burlap, and bagged every fallen leaf and probably put it out to the curb for it to go into the green bin pickup. But that's changed. Okay, change. So there's 6 reasons not to clean up your garden in fall. Now, they don't have my 7th reason is I was always kind of lazy, and if there's any flowers blooming late in the season, I never like to cut anything off. But there are 6 reasons. So the first one is native bees. We all know that bees have been in trouble. There's a decline in them. But bees like to overwinter in hollow stems. They lay their eggs or larvae in the ground. And native bees are really an important pollinator. So the garden provides winter habitat. And if we've cut everything down, we probably have taken away a lot of the habitat for the bees. So if for no other reason, it's very important for them to have a place to have their habitat. Okay. And this one was a surprise to me, but it probably shouldn't have been. But some butterflies take shelter in our gardens over the winter, and some of them overwinter as full butterflies. So they're burrowed down in the litter in your garden. And some of them overwinter as the chrysalis or as a caterpillar in there. But when we cut down a garden, we eliminate these overwintering sites. Now, I remember when we first moved to our country place, walking in the woods, about mid-March, and seeing a morning cloak butterfly flying around. I could not believe that it would be flying around at that time of year, because it was a nice sunny day, but it was still freezing at night. It was still snow on the ground, but the morning cloaks overwinter like a whole butterfly in the leaf litter that's on the ground there. So it's important for butterflies, and everyone wants to have their butterflies now. So, okay, so that's the third reason is ladybugs. And I always think of ladybugs as sort of the red with the black polka dots, but we have over 400 species of ladybugs in North America. The funny looking one is the larvae of a ladybug, and most hibernate when the temperature drops, and hopefully they're not hibernating in your windows coming into the house. Those are usually the Japanese ladybugs, but these will hibernate, and the best place for them to hibernate obviously is in your garden. Okay, and I don't know if you can see them, but insect-eating birds consume thousands of caterpillars and pest insects in the gardening season. And if you leave some of your flowering, the seeds from your flowers in place, then they will eat the hibernating insects and they'll remain in your yard. And that's what you're trying to do. So these are goldfinches that were on my on the black-eyed Susans, and they would sit there. Now, when they eat, they're not real neat, so you're going to get some extra plants growing up in there. So black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers are very, how did I say? They like to spread and like to seed, so you may have to be ripping out some plants in the spring. Okay. Predatory insects are another great thing that likes to overwinter. Green lacewings, praying mantis, and others, they like to sleep in the gardens. So to have a balance in your population, they need to have a winter habitat, or they'll go find someone else's garden. So the predatory insects are in there as well. Okay. And people. So there is beauty in the winter garden. I didn't take many pictures in the winter garden, but the snow on top of everything was always beautiful. And so it gives you something else to look at rather than a big flat spot. Okay. So what do you do in the winter time, or in the fall, not in the winter? The first is the remove thick layers of leaves. Now, at our former house, by the time we got into about the end of October, the leaves would be at least up to your knees because there were a lot of trees there. And so we left those leaves on all winter. The lawn would be buried and it would encourage disease. It weakens the grass. So you can run over them with a mulching lawnmower if they're not too deep, but we usually raked up our leaves, ground them up, and put them on the gardens, and then put them in the compost pile. So that's one thing with your leaves, but you can also fertilize your lawn early in the autumn as well. So there's a sort of like a fall fertilizing regime that you could follow. Mow your lawn one last time at a shorter setting, and you can overseed your lawn if necessary, and try white clover. So if you've had a lot of problems with grubs, they like to be in the roots of lawn roots. That's their favorite thing to live in, but they don't really like white clover. So if you can add some white clover in, it makes your lawn more healthy, and it helps to get back with eliminate some of the bugs, the grubs, sorry. Okay. Remove the annuals. So of all the things that you're going to leave in, annuals do not look good in winter. Once they've had a hard frost, they look terrible. I mean, they're usually slimy and not good at all. Dig up your tender bulbs. So if you've had dahlias, and this year, I don't know about you folks, but around Perth, this has been the most fantastic year for dahlias I think I've ever seen, and they're still blooming very beautifully. But dig up your tender bulbs, dry them, and store them in a dark place. Okay. Compost your leaves. This is my compost bin. I had 6 5x5x5 bins. The one on the far right facing you, that was the pretty much finished compost. And I would fill up all the other 5 with things from the garden and leaves. And they would usually be, the bins would be right full when leaf raking time was over, and not too much later they'd pack down and they would start to degenerate into compost. So cover your vegetable gardens with leaves and protect your tender perennials with them. So leaves are so wonderful. And they have so much nutrition, and they've taken the nutrition out of your yard all year long, and now they're putting it back again. So they're a very worthwhile thing to have. Okay. So winterize your trees and shrubs. Do not prune in the fall. So often, remember we talked about roses and people used to cut them back to a certain height. What happens when you prune trees in the fall is pruning stimulates growth. And that's, so if you cut them down in the fall, they'll put out new growth, and then the new growth will be too tender and it will freeze off. And that's what would happen with roses. We'd cut them back quite a bit. They would start to grow again. It would get cold and boom, they would have death on them. Cover small trees and shrubs with wooden structure. I don't know how many of you do that. I've never really done that. You can wrap the young fruit trees, their lower trunk with pest-proof tree wrap to keep the mice, voles, and rabbits. And the rabbits, a lot of these guys, they come along on top of the snow, so you don't just need to do it down near the ground, but up to what you think your snow level will be, because they don't mind coming along the snow. So you want to wrap them to keep them from chewing your trees. And continue watering the trees until the ground freezes, because that will help to get them through the winter. We had a very dry summer this year, although it has been turning quite a bit more. We've had a lot of rain in the last little while, but continue watering them. Okay, so that's your trees and shrubs. Bring your plants indoors, and you should have already done that because it's getting kind of late, but you could probably still try. But you don't want to be bringing in bugs from the outside. So spray with insecticidal soap 10 days before, second spraying 5 days before, final spraying just before bringing them in, and check all the nooks and crannies. You're looking for leaf junction because you're trying to keep pests and stuff outside, and keep the plants separated from the other house plants to see if they've got any disease on them or if they are bringing in insects. Okay. Now, a lot of us will take something like if we're talking about zone 5 and we want to have a zone 6, we might put it in a pot. But then what do we do with the pot? Or we might want to have the pot with a plant in it sitting on our deck, or we don't have a very big garden. If you're going to have a plant overwinter in a pot, you're not going to protect the pot, it should be about 2 zones lower. So if you're in zone 5, you should only have zone 3 plants in the pot. But you can also bury the pot in the ground and cover it with a thick mulch. And there is going to be some warmth coming up from the bottom, but this is a better way than just about anything else to keep plants that you want to keep in a pot and keep them so they can survive the winter. Okay. Now here comes the fun stuff. Clean your tools, but drain your hoses and rain barrels. It's so important because they'll crack if you don't do that. And if you have nozzles on your hoses, take them off and drain them. You're best if you can shut your outside watering spigots off so that so they don't freeze and crack. Clean out your cold frames. Clean, sand, and all your garden tools for winter storage. Clean the bird feeders, get them ready for winter. Drain the gas from gas-powered tools, or add a gas stabilizer to the gas tank and run it around your yard for about 10 minutes so you can get the gas stabilizing, and it will help to protect your lawnmower and other tools engine. Okay. And in your vegetable gardens, usually you clean out pretty much everything in your vegetable beds. Remove the plants and dispose of it, pest-infested plants and diseased plants. And that's the same in your flower gardens too. You want to remove anything that's diseased, because if you put a plant that's got powdery mildew, for example, you're leaving the powdery mildew spores in the garden, and next year you're probably going to get more. So dispose of the diseased plants. Plant your garlic, and my garlic guru always told me to plant my garlic on the full moon in October, and I believe we have 2 full moons this October. But you don't have to get out in exactly that day. But October is the ideal time. You can do it in November, but it's colder, so it's colder for the garden. And cover your garden with leaves or other organic matter. Okay. And if you have garden questions and you don't feel like answering them tonight, email me at lanarkmg@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you very quickly. Okay, is there any questions, or is everyone?
I am going to check the chat. So far, no questions.
I put a question in.
That's Judy. Hi, Judy. Go ahead.
I've been trying off and on to grow dianthus, and it never survives for me. And I'm wondering, is that because I'm not giving it enough drainage?
Quite likely. Oh, or
well, we're on the cusp of 5A and 5B here. So I was wondering if zone might have something to do with it.
Oh, well, I was on about the same, and I've grown it, and it survived. I mean, it doesn't survive all the time, but it does survive. Sweet William is like the taller version of it, and I've never had it survive, but I've certainly had dianthus, but I think it doesn't like it too wet, and it should have good drainage too, because it you know, if you get it clumped in too much, it likes a lot of air circulation. But and prune it back, like if you remember talking about it, even just shearing it so that because it produces a lot of seed, and I think that would be hard on your plant as well. But it is one that you either can grow it, or it doesn't like your property at all, I think.
Or it doesn't like you.
Yeah, it says, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Okay with me.
Yeah. Now, in terms of cleanup, I understand about leaving plants with hollow stems in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the neatest gardener, but I do like to do cleanup. Is there definitely a list of plants we should leave in the garden, and some that aren't that beneficial as cover, that it doesn't matter whether we take them out or not?
Well, the ones it's typically the ones that have good seed, like the echinaceas and the rudbeckias, you know, the black-eyed Susans and the purple coneflowers, because they're very attractive and they have nice, you know, holy stems. Things like daylilies, for example, I think that they're very, you know, marginal as something to leave in. They provide extra leaves and things for the bugs to live in, but they're not really, they don't provide any food for anybody. They're not, you know, I wouldn't do those. Peonies, I typically would cut them back quite close to the ground. Let's see, phlox, definitely cut them back, because they quite often get powdery mildew. And anything you can do, and when you cut them back, take the plants away, and if they have any powdery mildew on them, bag them and send them to the dump. Like, don't compost them or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that.
What about hostas?
Oh, hostas don't do you any good. I mean, by about middle of November, end of November, they're just like little thin pieces of paper in there. Like if you look at a hosta, I usually left my hostas in so I knew where they were in the spring, because you could still get a few of the dried up leaves in there, but they really don't do much for you at all. So they would be. Anything else? Any other ones or?
No, I can't. I do have, a good variety of plants. Most of us will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Diane, do you have a question? Or maybe she's left. Ah.
No, I think Diana is still here. She's on mute, but I know I planted Liatris this year.
Oh, yeah.
And I did kind of a border fence garden. And when you were talking about microclimates, it's possible that my garden, like my area kind of splits because it is uneven. It's at a cottage, you know what I mean? And most of them dried out, partly because the heat. We tried to keep it up, but between renters and all of that. So I'm hoping they're going to come back in year 2 and I'll see what I've got. But I don't know if you ever had any problems with this, but they're supposed to be deer resistant plants.
Yeah.
But I had one kind of get chopped. Maybe they just tried.
Well, yeah. Baby deer or fawns, I guess they call them, they'll try just about anything. And so they are the worst ones. Did your Liatris flower?
It was in flower when I planted it.
Okay.
Then a little bit and then no. So I don't know what to expect.
Oh, I would expect them back because they're a nice little bulb. And so I would expect them to come back. When I moved to the condo, I planted some and just planted the bulbs because, again, I'm budget conscious and or cheap. And I planted the bulbs and the plant grew, like you could see the leaves and things, but they didn't flower. But then the next year, they were beautiful. So I would expect them to come back and look at, and they're slow to come out. Let's see, I think they were mid-June before you saw any trace of them, and then you just see sort of little clumps of leaves coming up.
Okay, good to know, because I've got beautiful iris, but they're over so soon, so I just tried my luck. So I planted the Liatris and also Blazing Star.
Oh yeah.
Flowered a little bit, but I've got something chomping at the leaves there too. So
yeah, well, that's the joys of gardening, isn't it? In the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can spray if you want, like with something like Plant Skid or something like that, but then it gets to be more work than it is fun.
Does anyone else have any questions? Judy, I hid your video for now. Just so you know, this is being recorded and it'll go on YouTube. So Judy, is that okay with you that we saw you while you were asking the question there?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, good. Good. Well, if no one has any questions through chat, I don't see anything. So I'll just like to say thank you very much, Dale, for making this presentation for us. I know it's kind of different for everybody this year. We've been doing a virtual series and it's not always been easy to find people who are willing to do it in this format. So thank you very much. Really very much appreciated.
Well, thank you for all your help. I mean, this is my first time doing it and you made it so simple. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Well, good night, everybody, and we'll see you all next time. I'll put the link to your email when I publish the YouTube so people can email you directly. And Diana says, excellent presentation, thanks.
Oh, thank you, Diana. Appreciate that. Okay, I look forward to getting it and thank you all for showing up.
All right, thank you and have a great evening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.